Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our session with Speaker Ryan. The Speaker...
Hey, everybody.
The Speaker was only able to join us this morning because he has nothing else going on. And Paul, I just want to say, you're getting hit from the left, you're getting hit from the right, you're occasionally even getting hit from National Review. So I just want to say, we appreciate you, appreciate what you're doing, and thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So let's dive in on this very important question of nomenclature. Is it Ryan Care or Trump Care?
It's the American Health Care Act. Can you hear me? So first of all, thank you for having me on this stage.
Absolutely.
I really didn't want to sit on that stage, so I'm glad you had this separate one. Just joking. It's kind of weird.
Do you want to move over to the bigger stage?
Yeah, right, yeah. Just one day, maybe.
Wherever you are, Paul, is the biggest stage. Don't worry.
That's right. Let me just say one thing about NR. I cracked my first issue in 1989. I had a conservative Austrian economist professor that said, I think you and I think alike. You should look at this magazine. And it was the National Review, Bill Buckley. And I've been reading this thing ever since. And not every time do we, as conservatives, agree on everything, but on, 95% of the stuff we do. And I just want to say how much I really, really appreciate National Review, because it has helped form me, who I am, and how I think today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. We have a little personal history that Paul may have forgotten, but when I was selected as editor of National Review, kind of miraculously in my 20s, my housemates, when I was living here in Washington, gave me a keg party to send me off to Washington. And Paul actually attended when he was a staffer at Empower America. And then he was going to, he made a prudently early exit from this party. But I remember when he was leaving and he was going off to run for Congress, he said to me, I can't believe we're becoming those people. And little I know, what he was talking about was becoming Speaker of the House. All right, so Paul, you've said that this bill is going to need changes to get through. What sort of changes?
Yeah, so this is the legislative process, which is you have, in our House, it's a 4-committee stage process. And that means you make changes as you go through the system. The Budget Committee actually can't amend the bill. It's just the way the rules work. But they can put resolutions asking for the Rules Committee to make changes. And the 2 resolutions they called for in the budget markup yesterday was even more federalism, even more things that give states and governors the ability to customize Medicaid for their needs without having to go to, say, HHS for work requirements and things like that. So what we're working on is even more federalism for the Medicaid population, to give governors the ability to be completely free to customize Medicaid to their needs. Other issues we're looking at are on just how well the tax credit work and those kinds of things. The point being, what we're doing is listening to all people in our conference and making sure that we can make good changes that improve the bill, that refine the bill. The big pieces are all there. And the president, this is where I think he just got off the news. He was meeting with the biggest conservative caucus in Congress, called the Republican Study Committee. You and I cut our teeth in. He just worked with them, and they're all on board because they, with the president and the rest of us, have been talking about improvements to this bill. So those improvements are being made as we go through this process. It's basically more federalism, making sure that we respect the fact that states can experiment and tailor Medicaid to meet their needs. And as we get through this, what we're finding out is this is an exciting time. And I know what's happening is people are saying, gosh, I wish you had this or that reform in this bill. The challenge for us in the House is we have to work with the Senate rules. And the Senate rules are pretty tight on this thing called reconciliation, which means you have to write a bill that cannot be filibustered. And that means you can't put everything you want in a bill, otherwise it will be filibustered, and it will be a show vote. It will be a phony fake vote. We had a lot of votes repealing Obamacare that we knew could get filibustered, and we don't want to go down that path again, because we actually, really, within our power as Republicans, have the once-in-a-lifetime chance of actually repealing and replacing Obamacare. So we have to use those Senate rules to do that so it can't get filibustered. We proved in the last session that we can put a bill on the president's desk repealing Obamacare, basically fiscally gutting the law. We did that. Now we've taken that bill and we've added replace to it because so many of our members, conservatives and everybody in between, including the president, have said, do repeal and replace. Don't just repeal it and then have the thing collapse. Repeal it and replace it with patient-centered healthcare that's market-driven, that gives people the ability to go and do and buy what they want in a deregulated marketplace.
So I'm going to push you on just various criticisms that have come from all over the map. But one is, you're the House, why don't you just produce an internally coherent bill that doesn't necessarily take account of what's going on in the Senate, what the Senate rules are, and then pass this kind of pure bill, and then let Mitch McConnell mess it up later, rather than sort of starting out with what, for a lot of people, feels as though it's a compromise.
Yeah, so that's, again, the Senate rules. This is a lot of people don't understand how these things work, the Byrd rule, they call it. If we do that, they can't even bring the bill up in the Senate. Chuck Schumer can say this violates the Byrd rule, and then it takes 60 votes to even consider the bill. So Mitch McConnell couldn't even bring the bill up. So if we send a bill from the House that doesn't conform to reconciliation, the Byrd rule, the Senate can't even consider the bill. They can filibuster even going on the bill. So that's why we have to write this in such a way that Chuck Schumer can't block it from coming to the floor with a filibuster, so that Mitch McConnell can make sure that they can vote on the bill and then get that bill passed. Remember, this is a three-part plan here, and all simultaneous parts. First is a bill that we can use reconciliation for that they cannot filibuster. That is where you can repeal the individual and business mandate. That's where you can repeal the spending and the taxes. That's where you can put in the Republican healthcare tax policy, high-risk pools, health savings accounts, tax credits that equalize the tax treatment of healthcare. The fiscal moving parts we can do in reconciliation. Part two, and Tom Price just came to our conference 2 hours ago and walked a lot of our members through the enormous regulatory flexibility that he has. When they wrote Obamacare, they wrote this thing in Harry Reid's office in Christmas Eve in 2009. They were going on the fly, and they basically said, boy, there's a lot of stuff we can't figure out. Let's just have the secretary figure it out. So they put 1,442 provisions in Obamacare in the 2,700-page bill. There are 1,442 sections that say the secretary may or the secretary shall. That just gives tons of discretion to the secretary of HHS to figure it all out. Well, they didn't think that Donald Trump was going to be president and Tom Price was going to be Secretary of Health and Human Services after Obama. And so what Tom Price walked us through this morning was, these are all the things we can do using that flexibility in reverse to basically open up the marketplace. To let I see Leah Vukmir sitting right over here, one of the brilliant state senators we have in Wisconsin, who's a nurse and a healthcare specialist, the champion of HSAs in Wisconsin. Wisconsin now, because of Tom Price's regulatory authority, Seema Verma, this brilliant woman over at CMS, they can basically say to Wisconsin, you guys go set up your own healthcare marketplace. You set up your own healthcare regulatory structure so that Wisconsin can have whatever kinds of plans Wisconsin wants to have. And then the Republican tax credits, the HSAs and the risk pools, you can use that for those. So part two is deregulate and have a patient-centered, states' rights-run system. Part three are the other bills we would like to pass that we know we can't through reconciliation, that we think make the situation even better, but aren't necessary to fix this problem, make it even better. That's what interstate shopping, association of health plans, medical liability reform are all about. And what the president is really eager to do is to crisscross this country, making the case for those policies. And I think it might be interesting to note that he'll crisscross in those 10 states that he carried widely, where there was a Democrat up for re-election in 2018.
So in a nutshell, if I just repeat it back for the sake of my own understanding. So what you're saying is, because of Senate rules, we cannot fully deregulate Obamacare in this legislation, but Tom Price's administrative actions will be a big step towards deregulating.
And there are some we can, because they're tied, there's fiscal moves. If it's fiscal policy, you can do it. If it's not, if it's regulatory policy, you can't. That's the easiest way to describe how this rule works. So we're putting as much replace policy as we can that conform to the Senate rules so that they can't block the bill from even being considered, past that, and then the administration in part two, which they're working on right now simultaneously, can do that kind of deregulation, that kind of let the states go back and set up their own marketplaces. That's part two. Part three, pass these other bills. We're bringing them to the floor next week. Pass these other bills that we believe in that you can't put in reconciliation.
So let's go to some policy critiques of the first part of the bill. And what you'll hear from healthcare wonks, even healthcare wonks that are usually 100% on board anything Paul Ryan comes up with, is that you're repealing the individual mandate, you're leaving in place these key Obamacare regulations, guaranteed issue and community rating, and that itself is going to make the individual market even more unstable than it is now. Now, there's a provision for a surcharge on your insurance if you haven't been covered and you're jumping back into coverage, but they feel that that's too weak to have much of an effect. So this bill will actually make the individual market worse than even Obamacare
Yeah,
has.
that's not, obviously I don't agree with that, but more importantly, we consult actuaries and insurance companies literally on a daily basis, and they're telling us the opposite. So guaranteed issue is pretty much already baked in the cake and the insurance market's priced in. We do change community rating. What Obamacare did was they compressed community rating. This gets a little wonky.
It's okay. It's an idea summit.
Okay.
Take a little wonky.
They compressed community rating in such a way that they're basically going to have young, healthy people subsidize older, less healthy people, and that it will work if we just force them to buy this stuff. Well, that's not working. The individual mandate's not working. People are just taking the penalty in exchange, and therefore this is death spiraling. It's basically failing, and insurers are pulling out. So we're relaxing that community rating standard so that it goes back to reflect the actual cost of insurance, and that is why the tax credit is age adjusted so that it reflects those actual costs of insurance. And it's also why we have state-based high-risk pools. I'm looking at Lee again. We had a pretty good risk pool in Wisconsin. It worked pretty darn well, and there wasn't even a federal funding component with it. So the federal government will help kickstart state-based risk or reinsurance pools. So that what that means is, in the state, in the individual market, you have extra coverage for a person with a catastrophic illness. So you get cancer, your costs go up, the risk pool kicks in and helps you get affordable coverage so that you don't go broke if you get sick, but it also caps the exposure for insurance for everybody else. And that dramatically lowers the price of insurance for everybody else in the individual market. Just to give you an illustration of this idea, 1% of the people in this individual market drive 23% of the cost of insurance. So if you have risk pools, which Obamacare abolished, we used to have them, a lot of states had them, that covers that. You age adjust the tax credit, you deregulate the marketplace, and you have health savings accounts underneath to bring the consumer back into the game, to have people with skin in the game, price pressure, a marketplace for competition on choice, on quality, on price. That is how you restart a viable, individual, free market in healthcare. And it's not just a theory. Wherever these ideas have been tried, they've worked. And what all the insurers are telling us is if you guys do all of that, we'll come back into the marketplace. We'll be bringing prices down. Even the CBO is telling us in their score, when these reforms kick in, premiums start going down.
So are these things insurers are telling you privately that they're not comfortable saying publicly?
An insurance company can't make a projection because they're publicly traded. They can't go out and say these things specifically, but they show us their actuarial runs. They inform us with these things. CMS, now run by us, the Republicans, show us these things. But I look at the Anthem letter. We got a letter from Anthem, which is one of the biggest insurers in America, one of the biggest players in the exchange market, that's basically telling us this, and they put that in writing.
So let's stay kind of on the wonky plane here and talk a little bit about the structure of the credit. Another criticism you'll hear is that there's in effect a Medicaid cliff in this bill, where the Medicaid benefits you get if you're a recipient, are worth $6,000 or $7,000, something like that, and the credit will be worth much less than that. So you are in effect going to hurt kind of the very working poor, sort of working class voters that are a big element of the president's base.
Well, I would say that by having more market flexibility, by letting states open up marketplaces and having different products that are being offered, people will be able to get a health care coverage plan with the tax credit. What we've always believed as conservatives, whether it was National Review, Heritage Foundation, AEI, or whatever, equalize the tax treatment of health care for people in the individual market, because there are people who don't, we discriminate against people in the tax code who don't get health care from their job. And so by giving a tax credit, but also deregulating the marketplace, you will have a more viable marketplace for that person who's climbing the income scale to go into. It's better than the status quo, I would argue.
So yeah, I don't have a problem with the credit. I agree with you on that.
Yeah, you're saying
I'm getting to the criticism that the credit is not generous enough. And would you be open to making it more generous further down the income scale?
Those are things we're talking about.
So that's possible.
Those are among the ideas that are being considered and looked at.
And let me ask you something that
Not on the income, but on the age scale.
Let me ask you something that genuinely confuses me. Oftentimes I say I'm confused, but it's just rhetorical confusion, but this is genuine confusion. So you have a lot of defenders of this bill out there saying the problem with Obamacare, it gives you coverage, but you can't really get care because it's not good coverage. And what they're criticizing is catastrophic healthcare plans that have high deductibles, so you have to pay for routine expenses, but if you get hit by a bus, it's there for you. I'm not a healthcare wonk, but just paying loose attention over the last 10 or 15 years, I thought that was the Republican plan. I thought we wanted to get everyone catastrophic coverage. So what's wrong with these plans?
No, we believe in catastrophic coverage. We believe in having skin in the game. But the question is, what do you have underneath that? Obamacare did everything they could to basically quash health savings accounts. I co-authored that law in 2003. And the purpose of HSAs was to give people a tax-preferred vehicle to save for their out-of-pocket costs, for their under-deductible costs. Why do we believe this? Because we want to bring free market principles into healthcare, which have been missing for so long. Look at the two sectors in our economy that provide some of the most important aspects of our lives that we need: education and healthcare. Why do the costs in education and healthcare go up so much faster than everything else? Government. And so what we want are the basic principles of a market: transparency on price, transparency on quality, and an economic incentive to act on those things. Health savings accounts gets you that. So let me give you an example. Jen and I have 3 kids. They're 33 months apart. We've had 3 tonsillectomies, 3 years in a row. Same ENT, ear, nose, and throat doctor at the same hospital. Each of these times I asked up front, what is this going to cost? How much? A tonsillectomy is not a really complicated thing. They couldn't tell me what it was going to cost. I would get the bills for the tonsillectomy 3, 4, 5 months afterwards, and I'd get one from the anesthesiologist, from the ENT, from the hospital, from this. One son, it was $1,400 for a recovery of the tonsillectomy. His recovery, he sat in a lazy boy, ate Jello and watched SpongeBob for 2 hours, and then they let him go home. How does that cost $1,400? But I didn't know about it until 3 months after the procedure.
If you'd known, you wouldn't let him watch SpongeBob.
Exactly. So, MRIs. MRIs is a perfect example. MRIs can vary in price from $700 to about $3,000 in the Milwaukee metro area, based on the last numbers we've looked at. This is not a marketplace. So HSAs, getting consumers in the marketplace saying, God darn it, I want to see what this is going to cost me. I need to know. We need help. This isn't something you want central planners to fix. They can't. We need help of the American consumer and person and patient to help us fix this healthcare problem by going into this marketplace and demanding that these providers of our care and services, hospitals, doctors, nurses, insurers, compete against each other for our business based on quality and price and outcome. And there's nothing that does this more than health savings accounts. And that is our vision. That is the way we want to go. And so we really believe this idea of creating a strong, powerful individual market with all of these right market-based incentives will help us get at the root cause of this problem: high health inflation. It's other people's money. It's OPM, right? If you think it's somebody else is spending money on your health care, you don't really care how much money you're spent. If your employer says, I'm going to pay for your food also, you're going to go home, on your way home, you're going to run out of the grocery store and get filet mignon and, lobster tail on the way every time. If it's your money, you care. And that is the critical market mechanism that we think we're getting restored here to help crack this big problem.
So now let's move to the politics. As a sheer political question within your own caucus, if you're an outside observer, you probably think, well, the speaker has a problem on his right. Everyone we see on cable TV, 3 people I'm thinking of particularly seem to see all the time, are members of the House Freedom Caucus. But in terms of the persuasion you need to do among your members, do you have more work to do among the moderates or among the conservatives?
Yeah, no, it's some people negotiate on TV, some people negotiate not on TV. That's just the different tactics or procedures different people use. This is the legislative process, and in this day and age, it's very transparent. I would say probably 10, 20 years ago, it was less transparent. I like the transparency, but what you're having is people are articulating their issues and their concerns, either privately or publicly, but it comes from both sides. So what our job as leaders is to do is find that sweet spot. Find that landing place where we can bring a bill to the floor that can pass. And this means if we're ever going to, we're defederalizing one entitlement and capping its growth. That's incredible. And the orders of magnitude on how much this saves versus, say, welfare reform in 1996 are huge. And then another entitlement we're repealing. This Obamacare is an open-ended subsidy that we're repealing, and we're replacing it with long-standing conservative tax policy that we've all long believed in. And so what I try to help people understand or see is look at the forest of the trees here. Look at the enormity of this accomplishment. But if we're going to accomplish that, we have to have a bill that can pass, that can do this. And so that's the landing spot we're trying to get everybody to. And there are people from the middle and from the right who have various concerns. We're trying to make sure that we address as many of these concerns as possible without destroying the bill, without violating this Byrd rule, therefore it can be filibustered, and without losing votes, but adding votes. And we're really doing well. We feel very good. The president has been a great closer on this. He has been one who has gotten engaged in the last couple of weeks, who's helping with these negotiations, listening to people, helping bridge the gaps. He's actually been extremely constructive in making sure that we get this thing right.
Yes, I also wanted to ask you about that, because there's conventional wisdom among a lot of the journalists in the back of the room here is, okay, the president's been supportive, but he's also maintaining his flexibility, and if by some chance you don't find that sweet spot, and this thing looks like it's going down, he's going to bail, and it's going to be Ryan Care forevermore.
First of all, I didn't come here to be popular. I came here to get stuff done. I don't care. I mean, I really don't about my stuff. I just don't care. You know me long enough, and you know I'm a cause guy. So I just want to get this stuff done. I see this as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And by the way, he is fully committed. I mean, just 20 minutes ago, he had the study committee in that endorsed this bill. The biggest conservative caucus in Congress is the Republican Study Committee that just came out in support of this. National Right to Life just yesterday announced they're scoring this a vote. This is one of the most pro-life pieces of legislation we could have ever passed since partial birth abortion. So we really think we're moving in the right direction here. So I would say that that's not the case. But let's pull back for a second. This moment is a moment that may not come back around again. The moment of a Republican president, a Republican Senate, and a Republican House. Yeah, it's a razor-thin Republican majority. I get that. But if we do not see this moment in history for what it is, shame on us. And I look at it and I say, let's do the Scott Walker, Mitch Daniels plan. What those two governors did when they had good legislatures is they went big, they went bold, they took their principles, they put them in place, they passed those reforms, and they worked. This is what we have to do here. And this is basically our operating theory. And that is why Mitch McConnell and I spent November, December, and January working with President Trump and his transition team, mapping out a 200-day agenda for how we achieve and implement this agenda that we've all discussed. And so we are exactly where we are planning and hoping to be in executing this agenda. We go from healthcare reform to tax reform. One helps the other dramatically.
Why?
Well, because of revenues. We're basically stripping about $1 trillion of revenues out of the tax code by repealing these Obamacare taxes, which makes tax reform $1 trillion easier. And that's not chump change.
So,
It is.
so
$1 trillion is about 10% of rate cuts on businesses.
So Donald Trump won in November by tearing up the rule book, not just in terms of political tactics, but what was Republican orthodoxy on a lot of issues for a very long time. Is there anything about his victory that makes you reconsider or just want to think at least more deeply about elements of your own worldview?
Oh, sure. You always have to think like that. I believe that very much so. I think what the president did the most and gave the best voice to is what I would call the real forgotten man and woman in this country. You have to remember, I come from Wisconsin. I come from kind of Rust Belt north. My hometown got just crushed when our GM plant left in 2009. Half the people I went to high school with, their parents worked there, and the idea was you could go get a great job there. I mean, I've got buddies from high school who worked at the plant, made 6 figures, and now have jobs that pay them about a third as much. It's just, so I think he gave voice to that. And I think that's real and it's palpable. And I think we have to make sure that our conservative principles actually translate into real, tangible results that improve the lives of these men and women in this country who really have been forgotten and I certainly feel that they've been forgotten. So I think that refocuses our minds to make sure that our policies reflect those things. I think what you have here is a very beautiful marriage or a fusion of the different strands of conservatives.
The term is a big, fat, beautiful marriage.
Yeah, it's a big, fat, beautiful marriage, bigly. That of conservative principles and this kind of healthy populism. There's unhealthy populism, there's healthy populism. The healthy populism is dealing with the economic anxieties of the forgotten men and women in this country and making sure that our principles applied rightly offer policies that address these things. That, to me, is what I feel like we need to focus on achieving.
So is the answer to the question then just a greater focus on the economic interests of these voters? More of a focus than you would have had a year or two ago?
Well, I think we just had to prioritize better. We had to just honor our priorities. And that's why we basically focused our agenda down to the basics. There's a million things we'd love to do, but let's focus on the basics, and let's get that going right now. That's why just economic growth and upward mobility, tax reform, in my worldview, means let's get manufacturing going again. Not everybody's going to go get a 4-year degree. So what about the person who's going to go to a tech school and become a welder or become a machinist? We've got to have an economy that provides them a good way of life, a good living. And those are issues that I think we need to address much, much more. Welfare reform, I think, is one where we're trapping people in poverty. We're basically paying people or disincentivizing people from getting out of poverty into work. We've got to fix that. So I think those are the things where our priorities need to be focused on and maybe not on some other issues.
So tax reform, you've had a lot of blowback from some of these conservative groups on the border adjustment tax, which I say is going to be just passed on to consumers and it's going to hurt certain sectors, it's going to be highly disruptive and isn't conservative.
I beg to differ on that. I've been doing tax reform since I was doing it for Jack Kemp in the early 90s. Going to a consumption tax for businesses is the most pro-growth, economically neutral kind of tax system you can have. There are the fair tax border adjusts. I mean, that's a very popular conservative tax reform plan. Lots of these tax reform plans do border adjustments. People just didn't know it until now. And the point I would make is 160 countries border adjust today. We don't, along with Afghanistan and North Korea and Somalia and Suriname and a handful of other basket case countries. So 160 countries border adjust their taxes. We don't do that. And as a result, the way our system works is we incentivize businesses to move their manufacturing overseas. We incentivize businesses to relocate overseas. In the tax code today, it makes less sense to be here or to make things here than it is to do it overseas. Why on earth do we want to keep doing that? Our biggest business, publicly traded business in Wisconsin, was a business called Johnson Controls. Johnson Controls, until a year ago, was an American company paying a 35% tax rate worldwide. Now they bought an Irish company, became an Irish company, and that's a 12.5% tax rate now. We're losing our seed corn. We're losing businesses and our competitive edge. So the whole purpose of a border adjustment tax is to get us back in being competitive. And the good thing for us is our government is still smaller relative to our peers. It's 20% of GDP. So we have a 20% of GDP government, but we have inarguably the worst tax code in the industrialized world. All these other countries have an income tax on their businesses and a consumption tax. And what they're doing is they're realizing the income tax is really inefficient, it's bad for growth, so they're lowering their income tax rates, making it up on their consumption tax. Meanwhile, we have a really ugly, uncompetitive income tax that is pulling capital and manufacturing from our country to others. So what we're basically saying is let's flip our system and make it a destination-based cash flow tax, which is another way of saying a consumption tax. But as conservatives, we don't want to have a VAT tax. We don't want to have the kind of consumption tax that's sneaky with respect to the size of government. We want the incidence of taxation to continue to fall on the person so that they see, know, and feel the true size and cost of their government. But we want to have a tax system that also is extremely competitive internationally. So the plan that we're offering, we know is better than anybody else in the world. So I would rather win tax competition. I would rather, like Ronald Reagan did in '86, have a tax system that's better than anybody else in the world. If we have to stick with an income tax system, we know from 6 years of research at the Ways and Means Committee that we could do tax reform on an income tax, but it would give us sort of a mediocre tax. We have the worst tax now. We can go from the worst to sort of behind in the middle. I'd rather go to the front of the pack and have the best possible tax system for American workers and American jobs and American companies, and put us in number one with respect to being competitive globally. That's what we're trying to achieve.
Do you expect the president to endorse it?
We're working on look, this whole thing is a long conversation about how do we get to the sweet spot where we all agree. He already started with his tax plan in the campaign that in so many ways looks exactly what we put out there, with some notable detail differences that we're now still working on. So we're getting closer and closer and closer. Same thing with healthcare. And healthcare, this kind of conversation is occurring where we're getting closer and closer and closer and getting consensus. I basically would say, Rich, what's happening out there right now in the conservative movement is the necessary growing pains of going from being a 10-year opposition party to a governing party. Last 2 years of Bush, Pelosi and Reid ran Congress. So for the last 10 years, we were just opposing. And we were getting good at opposing. And as we got down the path of opposing, we kind of started getting these circular firing squads going as well. I mean, remember the presidential primaries and the rest? So if we really believe in what we believe in, then we need to harmonize, come together, and be a good conservative governing party so that we can actually make good on these ideas and reforms. What good is it to just howl at the moon? We have a chance of actually making a difference. So we've got to come to consensus as conservatives and figure out how to actually deliver on these reforms. And so this is just what I think is the churning of the growing pains of going from an opposition party, has a lot of circular firing squads, to going to a governing party that actually delivers. And the president is more than anybody else today helping bridge these gaps and bring people together.
So let me ask you on something to focus on the negative as a journalist should. Something where it seems unlikely there's going to be a consensus. You have been very clear for years, and we've seen compelling PowerPoint presentations about how the entitlements growing out of control is driving the country into a ditch on the debt.
Yes. And
we have a president of the United States who basically seems pledged not to touch entitlements. Where does that leave us?
So it's the healthcare entitlements are the big drivers of our debt. There are three: Obamacare, Medicaid, and Medicare. 2 out of 3 are going through Congress right now. So Medicaid, sending it back to the states, capping its growth rate. We've been dreaming of this since I've been around, since you and I were drinking at a keg,
I was thinking about something else. He was thinking about reforming Medicaid.
I was. I've been thinking about this stuff for a long time. We are on the cusp of doing something that we've long believed in. Obamacare, we're repealing Obamacare and replacing it with long-standing conservative, Republican, individual-based, market-driven healthcare policy. Medicare, this isn't in this bill because it's not a Medicare bill. That's an issue we're going to have to keep talking about and litigating and discussing. But I'll take 2 out of 3 in the first 4 months of this administration any day, all right? So that's getting us in a good direction. So I really feel like we're making substantial progress on this thing, because if you want to prevent a debt crisis, you have to deal with entitlements. There's just no two ways about it. And the reforms that we've long championed on the old age, the 65 and above entitlements, are prospective. Don't change benefits for people in or near retirement, but do it for those of us who are in the X generation on down prospectively, and make it market-based, make it so that we have more market freedom. We really believe that works. And that is a discussion we're just going to keep having. But the president has been pretty clear about this. And his focus is making sure that people who currently count on these programs, people who are about to retire, who organize their lives around these promises, have those promises kept for them, and we agree with that.
Paul, thanks so much for joining us,
You
and
bet.
Godspeed.
Thank you, Rich.
Appreciate it.
Continue, man.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.